Hey there, I'm Trang Vinh, and this is Seattle Eats, a food podcast from the Seattle Times and KUOW. We're bringing you something different today. We just marked a huge moment for the Vietnamese community in Seattle. Yesterday, April 30th, was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. History books call it the fall of Saigon, when the North Vietnamese army entered the capital and ended the country's long, bloody civil war. Since then, more than 1 million Vietnamese people have moved to the United States. Many of them refugees, including my family. We knew Americans brought our culture and our food to the places where we settled. It's why pho and banh mi shops spring up in every neighborhood of Seattle and in other hubs of the Vietnamese community across the U.S. So it's fitting that when the public radio podcast Splendid Table was in town, I talked to host Francis Lam about Seattle's Vietnamese food scene. Today, we're going to hear that conversation, and I'll drop a few recommendations for new spots to try. Let's get to it.
So like most cities on the West Coast, Seattle has a rich and diverse Asian population, both recent immigrants and multi-generational communities. From a culinary point of view, though, I think that two of Seattle's communities in particular aren't as nationally well-known as they should be. The Vietnamese food here is spectacular. It's so good. And Filipino food, honestly, I think Filipino food is just, it is just ridiculously underrepresented all over the country for how amazing it is. So joining us next are two people who are standing up for these cuisines and these communities. Trang Vinh is a food writer and restaurant critic for the Seattle Times, host of KUOW's Seattle Eats podcast, and helped put together an amazing package for the Seattle Times called The Best of Seattle's Vietnamese Food Scene. Trang Vinh. Next, Melissa Miranda is the chef owner of Musang in Kilig. In 2022, Chef Mel was named a Best New Chef by Food & Wine magazine. And last year was a finalist for the James Beard Award for Best Chef in the Northwest. And we get to have dinner at our restaurant tonight. I got a table. Psyched. I've seriously been texting, I was texting her on the plane on the way here, and she was like showing me dishes on the menu. I'm like, gonna have that, I'm gonna have that. It was a fun way to spend 6 hours. Tom, I'm gonna start with you. Okay, when I have made my feelings on Vietnamese food here in Seattle clear, but I have to tell you, normally when I think of Vietnamese food in America, my head first goes to Southern California, and then it goes to Texas and the Gulf Coast, New Orleans and Mississippi. I used to live in Mississippi, and in this tiny, tiny neighborhood, we had a Vietnamese community there. But as you've lived and eaten in Seattle for 20 years, what stands out to you about the Vietnamese food here?
You know, Francis, you realize Washington State has the third largest Vietnamese population in the United States. And yet when it comes to our restaurants, you really don't hear much about them until recently. Yeah. That makes me sad because I would say we're just as good as some of the other big pockets from Houston and Orange County. We're just as good. And I would say in the last 20 years, I would say there are two families that pretty much define the culinary scene here for the Vietnamese communities. They're the Pham sisters of Pho Ba. They're the Bond siblings of Monsoon and Babar. And I
went there for lunch today.
Yeah.
That babar.
That's right. We talked about this. We went to Babar. It's great, isn't it? And they have pretty much defined what Vietnamese food is, I would say, in the last 10, 15, and 20 years in this community. And even setting the prices, and we talked about this, about monsoon, right? And I don't know if people remember this, because I see a lot of faces there I do recognize. But one of the seminal moments in the Vietnamese restaurant scene here in the last 20 to 30 years is that one day the chef at Monsoon, Eric Bond, decided, you know what? This pho is underpriced. I'm going to charge $9.50. The going rate was $6, and if it's high, it's $7. And he charged $9.50 because he says, well, I use more bone marrow, I use higher beef quality. And he didn't think much of it. He thought, well, you know, if you don't like it, they just won't order it and just move on with our life. Well, guess what? I turn on the morning show and someone says, can you believe this? Someone's charging $10 for a bowl of pho. And then I drive by Monsoon and there is a TV station parked out front. True story. And the only other time that I've seen a TV station parked out front of a restaurant is because of the shooting overnight in both cases. In this case, the TV station wanted to know, well, why would you charge $10 for a bowl of pho? For Monsoon's credit, they did not back down. He talked to every reporter, he talked to every customers who complained, and he says, look, at Dick's or at a fast food restaurant, the burger is cheaper. At a sit-down restaurant, a burger costs more, and it's higher quality, and you accept that. And you're gonna have to accept that there are two different pho here. There's pho, lower end, or maybe fast casual, in a different neighborhood, but in a sit-down restaurant in a high-end neighborhood, high-quality beef, you pay $10. So this is an ongoing problem, not just in Seattle, but across the country. But I would say, I give Monsoon credit, because they took a stand on this. And now we have $24 bowl of pho. So
okay, now you're going too far. Yeah. Here's a question: when the pho was $9.50 and it caused like a citywide scandal, what was the going rate for a plate of spaghetti bolognese?
Oh, that was around $15. In fact, Eric Bond, he mentioned this. He says, you know, the pasta wasn't handmade, and it was ragu. It was $15.99. And his pho was $9.50. And even back then, the ramen cost more. And he said this is a major problem in the Vietnamese community here in Seattle. We have to get the mainstream community to understand that our food is worth just as much as any other culture, and not less, not more. If that bowl of noodle and beef was French or Italian, you would have no problem paying $9.50. None whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. I love that people in the room clapped at this story. Now you can't get an egg for that much. But a fried egg, that's another $10. But I mean, I say this with seriousness. I mean, obviously, rising food prices are not good in the big picture. But in the specific picture that you're talking about, it's not so much, oh, can we sustain ourselves and our families? Can we feed ourselves, you know, and not and affordably? But it's a question too of value and of cultural value. It's a question of saying to a person, they're worth more than you. Their culture is worth more than yours.
Exactly.
If we refuse to believe that a bowl of pho that is the product of craft and high-quality ingredients just the same, or if not more, than a pasta bolognese at an Italian restaurant.
You see it now, Francis, because think about this. If you see the hand-pulled noodles, you can't charge $20. You will get some backlash on that. But if it's pasta, and it's handmade and machine-made, it's hard to find it under $20. Bang-bang noodle, you know, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of manual labor.
Yeah.
Hell, soup dumpling is a lot of manual labor. And people complain about the prices.
I love this conversation. I also don't want people to walk away from this conversation being like, oh, what's that thing you learned listening to Splendid Table about Seattle's Vietnamese food? Like, I heard it's expensive. And they're really happy about that. So give us a little bit more, too, in terms of how have you seen that play out in a way that makes the food here special, not just in terms of the price point, but in terms of what chefs and restaurants are able to do because they've increased the sense of value and the sense that people like should be paying for like high quality of craft.
I think the food scene in Seattle when it comes to Vietnamese food is as exciting. They take more risks. They think more outside the box than any other point in the last 20 years. And I think a good example of this is Ramie. It's a new restaurant on Capitol Hill. Has anyone been there? Yeah. It's I would say it's the most ambitious restaurant, Vietnamese restaurant that Seattle has ever seen. They do not have pho or banh mi, and there's a very conscious decision because their point is Vietnamese food is more than just banh mi and pho. It's like a whole new other menu. And so they made a very self-conscious decision not to put that on the menu. It's elevated food. Yes, it's high-end, but so is other, French, Italian food. You will pay more, but it is one of the most ambitious restaurants that I've seen here in Seattle.
What's a dish you love there?
I love the egg custard. It's based on
It's
the French
$65.
laundry. Yeah. It's only $14. It's 2 egg custard. It's in the eggshell. It's egg custard with sort of like a duck ragu-ish, duck stew with like Vietnamese herbs. It is fantastic. It's one of the best things I've eaten this year. And I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, Vietnamese food need to be expensive. I would say that right now, the most exciting casual food, I wouldn't say cheaper, but exciting, good value, are in Vietnamese coffee houses. And this is probably the best trend in Vietnamese cuisine right now. And I'm telling you, the Seattle coffee houses are better than the other Vietnamese community. And I'll tell you why. I will tell you why.
Because Seattle invented coffee?
Yeah, pretty much. It's more accepted here. Don't think of Vietnamese coffee house as a coffee house. Because Vietnamese don't understand this American concept of a coffee house where you open in the morning and then you're done for the day at 2. Because Vietnamese are like, you have this real estate, why not open during dinner? Why not open at night? So that's why when you go to Vietnamese coffee house, and you can see a lot more in this city, they are open from morning to evening, and they have happy hour in the evening. And some of the best sandwiches and pastries are in coffee houses. So trust me, it's a good deal.
Right on. So come to Seattle, eat Vietnamese food. It's expensive and it's like Italian food. Let's go to Melissa. I've read so much about you, folks calling you the voice of a new generation of Filipino chefs. But you actually were originally going to open an Italian restaurant.
Speaking of, thank you, Tan, for
What
this
happened?
wonderful introduction.
We talked about this.
Yes, I actually did my culinary training in Italy. I lived in Florence for 6 years and learned how to cook Italian food. I worked in New York and I worked at Italian restaurants. And so the vision way back when was actually to partner with a friend here and kind of interpret my idea of what Filipino what Italian food could be through a lens of a Filipina American woman living in Italy. Because that was also a huge adventure, being a woman in a foreign country where not a lot of people who look like me are in kitchens. So, that quickly changed when, I came back home to Seattle and the landscape had changed and there's a lot of Italian restaurants that exist here. So maybe
You worked at a
was
great
it.
one, Bar del Corso.
I did. I also worked at an Italian restaurant here. Shout out to Bar del Corso in Beacon Hill. My dad immigrated from the Philippines, came here, moved to Beacon Hill, and Beacon Hill, a lot of immigrants moved to Beacon Hill, not just Filipinos, but a lot of Vietnamese folks, Chinese families, and seeing that there was a lack of representation for Filipino food. It kind of was like, why would I tell someone else's story when I can tell my own? So here we are.
But you grew up in the Filipino community here, right? And you've also talked about how a lot of the places that you grew up with, a lot of the Filipino businesses in that community were closing and what was happening?
Gentrification.
The G word.
The G word. Growing up, there was a restaurant called Inai's Kitchen. Mom and son team, Tito Ernie Rios. He was a legend. He is a legend and was definitely cooking Filipino food way ahead of the game. Not what you're used to, maybe like a buffet style or a like point called turo turo. He was actually plating Filipino food, trying to create this really incredible space. But they got priced out. Manila Sunset was a business there. They got priced out. Cuisines Filipina existed. They got priced out. And so everything that I grew up, eating or knowing in a restaurant type setting, like they all closed. And it was pretty devastating. I'd still drive by Cuisines Filipina and it's just, boarded up. It's just a reminder of, the importance of what it is that I do, I think.
Yeah. And so you opened Musang.
I did,
and, like I said, I'm super excited to come for dinner tonight. And I got a reservation at 9:30 because that's when I could get a reservation. So it's super busy. And like you said, it's food that is telling your story, right? It's the food that you ate that you're just describing in these places, but also filtered through your mind as a chef and filtered through your story. What are some of the dishes that you have on your menu right now that you feel really showcase that story, that really sort of tell that story of what you're trying to do?
I think one thing that's really beautiful about Musang is that our menu changes seasonally. And it's something, we always say that our food is cooked from our childhood memories because most of my cooks and my chefs and myself, we grew up here. I'm never going to make something that your grandma made for you in the Philippines or, I don't have access to the ingredients, but I know what my parents cooked for me or my grandparents cooked for me. So I really like to lean into seasonality. It's also something that I learned when I lived in Italy, but my favorite dish on the menu right now is halibut sinigang. Sinigang is traditionally a sour soup made with either tamarind or kamiyas or guava. Always has a protein. We're serving an olive oil poached halibut with a rhubarb sinigang broth. And it is just delicate and beautiful.
Is that on the menu tonight?
That's on the menu tonight. It's on the menu for probably a month, I hope, or two. It's a really beautiful dish that really represents, I think, the Pacific Northwest, myself, a little bit of Italy, all in one.
So the foodies come, right? They've read about you, and they come with an open mind because they're excited to see these dishes. What do the aunties and uncles say when they come in?
Oh, the aunties and the uncles. I think in the beginning, when we first opened, there were a lot of aunties and uncles that didn't understand what we were doing. I think when we talk about value in Asian culture generally, quantity is more valued than quality. And so there's a part of an education for us in this generation to show and teach the elders in our community as well that, hey, what we're feeding you is made from incredible product, from things that are in season by many hands, right? So I'm trying to give value back to you, to your experience, to your childhood, where you were ashamed or you were not, Filipino food was always eaten at home or shared at home. You never really found restaurants. So the goal was to be like, hey, you can be proud, right? You might not understand it. Hopefully it brings you nostalgia, That's all we want to do when we make the food is hopefully give you that ratatouille moment. It might not look like what you know, but I definitely promise it will taste like you know. But, yesterday, I think I was working the floor, and this woman came in for her birthday. And she's Filipino. She's been in the States for 5 years. And she had mentioned, and she goes, "You make me proud to be Filipino." So I think it's safe to say that the aunties and uncles are starting to get what it is that we're doing and are being able to reclaim a little bit of pride for themselves.
I love that. And I hope you heard in this room how proud the city is of you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Melissa Miranda and Tan Vinh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
While I was talking to Francis Lam, I mentioned Ramie on Capitol Hill. It's one of the hottest Vietnamese restaurants right now. Another is Pho Hien Gang in Renton and Café La Vie in Tacoma. We have a list of these restaurants in the show notes. Check them out. Thanks for joining us for this special episode of Seattle Eats. The show is a production of the Seattle Times and KUOW, part of the NPR network. You can support Seattle Eats by investing in the local newsroom and the specialized beats that make this sort of storytelling possible. Please consider joining and subscribing at kuow.org/eats and seattletimes.com. Seattle Eats is produced by Claire McGrain and edited by Jim Gates and Trevor Lensmeyer. I'm Tan Vinh. See you next week.